Section 2.6, we're going to look at composition of functions. You should have already gone through the other operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But now we look at composition of two functions. That's what the small circle represents. Okay. You'll notice in these problems sometimes we'll input a number into the composition. When that happens, we'll output a number. When we input x, we'll just only be able to output an algebraic expression involving x. Okay. So again, remember composition is one first, then the other. So f, and this is read as f of g of 2. The first thing you might want to do is just change it to the more familiar notation, which is f of g of 2. So again, we know in math we always do this inside parentheses first. So we're trying to figure out what's g of 2. Well, g is just the squaring function, so we square that, we get 4. The f function doubles the input and subtracts 1. So it's 2 times 4 minus 1, or 7. Okay. So again, the idea is you plugged in 2 to the g function, that squared it, so it spit out 4, which as a result then gets plugged into f. Doubles it and subtracts 1, and that's how you get to 7. Okay. G of f of 2, right, it's a different order, so we would expect a different output. So remember we have to do f of 2 first, so we double it and subtract 1, so 2 times 2 minus 1 is 3. And remember g is just the squaring function, so we get 9. Okay. Back to f of g, in this case of negative 3. So again, we do the inside function first. The g function is a slightly easier one. We're just doing the squaring function. So negative 3 squared gives you 9. Remember, the f function is double and subtract 1. So we do 2 times 9 minus 1, or 17. Okay. And then g of f of negative 3. Remember, we have to do f of negative 3 first. So again, it's the f function doubles it and subtracts 1. So we double it, get negative 6, subtract 1, we'd be down to negative 7. G is the squaring function. Okay. When we plug in x, again, we just work with an expression of x. So f of g of x. Okay, so again, we're not plugging in a 2 or a negative 3, we're plugging in x. So what does g do to any input? It squares it. What does f do to any input? It doubles it and subtracts 1. Okay, so again, it's real important that you don't call g of x equal to x squared. Think of g as the squaring function. F of x is 2x minus 1, but in general, what does the f function do? It doubles the input and subtracts 1. Okay, so in this one, it's g of f of x. Again, what does f do to any input? Doubles it and subtracts 1. What does g do to anything? It just squares it. Okay, you don't even have to square it out. Okay. F of 2, it's okay to use the same function twice. So again, just remember the f function, what does it do to any input, in particular 2? Doubles it and subtracts 1. So double it to 4, subtract, you get 3. Now we're plugging 3 back into that same function again, double it, get 6, subtract 1 to get 5. Okay. And then g of 3. Remember, g is our squaring function, so we square the 3, we get 9. What does g do to 9? G always squares, so we get 81. And then just a slightly different type of problem with composition, and this will be a little bit more useful to you when you get to calculus. Okay. But when you look at some functions, you could sort of say, I do this first, and then the second thing. And that means it's a composition of two functions. So if you look at something like h1 of x to be the square root of x plus 3, the first thing we know we would do to any input is add 3. Once we have that, then we would square root. So those are the two pieces. So if we're going to write it as f of g of x, remember, I think, well, what's the first thing we want to do? That will be our g. The first thing we want to do is add 3. So that'll be our first function. The second thing we want to do is square root. So that'll be our second function. And you notice it's just square root of x, not square root of x plus 3. So when you can compose them, we check this, f of g of x, again, the inner function, we're just adding 3. The outer function square roots the whole thing. And that's exactly what we wanted it to be. Okay. Same thing here. We're going to do 3x minus 5 first, then square the result. So again, when we have these two pieces, we want it to be f of g of x. G is going to be the first function again. Again, what would we do first here? We don't square first. We do 3x minus 5 first. So our first function will be multiplied by 3 and subtract 5. The second function is the squaring function. Okay. And again, just as a check, what's f of g of x? Well, the g function takes any input, in this case x, makes it 3x minus 5. The f function is the squaring function. And that's what we wanted it to be. Again, this is a little bit more useful to us when we get into calculus, to sort of think of which function you do first, or an inner and an outer function.